Welcome to Author Stories, the podcast where we talk to the best writers in the industry and discuss writing and the creative process. Whether you're a writer, a reader, or both, we hope you'll find something here that makes you love books and the writers that create them. You can find archives of all of the great conversations I've had with authors over the years at hankgarner.com. Take some time and browse around there. I'm sure you'll find a new author to love, find inspiration for your own creative life, and find a new story to get lost in. Today's guest is Jan Stocklassa. He's got a brand new book called The Man Who Played with Fire. If you are a fan of Stieg Larsson's Millennium trilogy, which began with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, you're going to love this story. It's the true story of what Stieg was working on to try to crack the case of the assassination of the Swedish Prime Minister. This is a gripping story, and you're going to love this interview. Before we talk with Jan, let's thank some sponsors who make the show possible. Jasper T. Scott. His box set Dark Space, the complete series. This is 6 books bundled together, on sale now for 99 cents. 6 complete books, over 600,000 copies sold. More than 2,000 pages of epic space opera for the low price of 99 cents. Also available in Kindle Unlimited if you're a Kindle Unlimited subscriber. Humanity is defeated. 10 years ago, the Scythians invaded the galaxy with one goal: to wipe out the human race. Now the survivors are hiding in the last human sector of the galaxy, Dark Space. Once a place of exile for criminals, now the last refuge of mankind. The once galaxy-spanning Imperium of star systems is left guarding the gate, which is the only way in or out of Dark Space. But not everyone is satisfied with their governance. Freelancer and ex-convict Ethan Ortain is on the run. He owes crime lord Alec Barandi 10,000 souls, and his ship is badly damaged. When Barandi catches up with him, he makes an offer Ethan can't refuse. Ethan must infiltrate and sabotage the Valiant, the Imperial Star System's fleet carrier which stands guarding the entrance of Dark Space, and then his debt will be cleared. While Ethan is still undecided about what he'll do, he realizes that the Imperium has been lying and putting all of Dark Space at risk. Now Brandi's plan is starting to look like a necessary evil. But before Ethan can act on it, he discovers that the real plan was much more sinister than what he was told, and he will be lucky to escape the Valiant alive. Grab all 6 books for 99 cents right now. Dark Space, the complete series by Jasper T. Scott. The Unwelcome Trilogy by R.D. Brady. Survivor, Mother, Leader, and Humanity's Last Chance. Deep within the remnants of the United States, Lila Richards oversees a camp of 200 survivors. In a world where living is an everyday struggle, and only through banding together can people survive, the arrival of the Unwelcome only made her job harder. Riley Quinn and Miles Jones have been raised by Lila for the last 5 years. They're also one of the cursed, the children between the ages of 13 and 18, whom the Unwelcome kill on sight. No questions, no pleas, just death. Protecting one another and the people of their camp is ingrained in all of them. But now each of them faces increased danger as the reason why the cursed have been targeted by the Unwelcome slowly comes to light. And that truth will shock them to their core. Now time is running out, not just for the cursed who are being hunted down by the Unwelcome, not just for Lila and her family who will face the greatest challenge yet, but for all of humanity. The world changed radically 35 years ago, but today humanity's very existence is on the line, and the fight has begun that will ensure its future or its annihilation. Fans of A.G. Riddle, James Rollins, Suzanne Collins, and Brandon Sanderson will love the Unwelcome Trilogy. Pick up your copy of the Unwelcome Trilogy on Amazon today. Edge of Valor, a military sci-fi thriller by Josh Hayes. When their mission fails, his begins. David Weber calls it a tour de force. Special Agent Jackson Fisher is a man after truth. When a military operation to extract a high-ranking ambassador from the war-torn border world of Stonemaier ends in disaster, Fisher is called in to investigate. A whole platoon went in, but only 3 Alliance Marines returned home. The rest killed in action along with hundreds of civilians. With tensions between the Holloman Alliance and Stonemaier rising, Fisher attempts to stitch the pieces together. One thing becomes more and more certain. the surviving Marines are lying. As the truth unfurls, Fisher begins to realize this was far more than a simple rescue mission, and that the truth might be something best left buried. Filled with action, mystery, and well-crafted characters, Edge of Valor, the Valor series Book 1, will put you into a world of war, conspiracy, and betrayal. It's perfect for fans of David Weber's Honorverse or Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan with a futuristic flair. That's Edge of Valor by Josh Hayes. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I am really excited to have Jan Stocklassa on the show with me today. He has an amazing new book. It's called The Man Who Played with Fire, Stieg Larsson's Lost Files and the Hunt for an Assassin. Guys, I have had this book for a few weeks now, and it is utterly captivating. And if you love mysteries and thrillers like I do, or if you have experienced Stieg Larsson's Millennium trilogy with the girl with the dragon tattoo and the follow-ons to that, you need this book in your collection. Welcome to the show, Jan.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
It's good to have you. I've been excited to talk with you, but we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or a storyteller?
I think actually it must be from high school, when my teacher actually told me you should write, and she told it in a way that I reacted to, and actually I realized that when she said it, that's actually something that I want to do also. Then it took quite some time before I started to write. So it's been there for a while. Yeah.
Were you an avid reader as a younger person?
Yes, I was. As a teenager, I read a lot, and I was much more intellectual than I am today. But I was reading all these Russian writers, really complicated, Dostoevsky, and a lot of other quite intellectual stuff. That passed, but I still read quite a lot.
Do you remember what it was about those early novels that captured your imagination?
Well, it's always been about the stories, and like getting into this special world where you're suddenly in someone else's mind, and in events even that have been captivating for me. So that's what I try to do also in my two books, to write it as stories, even if it's built on or always based on reality.
Right. The new book that you've got, The Man Who Played with Fire, is a stunning book. For people that might not be familiar with what this story is, let's begin with Stieg Larsson. Who was he? And I think a lot of people are familiar with the novels that he wrote that would later turn into movies. But what else was he doing with his life that we come to find out about in this book?
Yeah, I think the one important thing to remember is that he only wrote the novels for the last 4 years of his life, and he sent them in, the 3 ones, at once, at the same time, and got them accepted. Yeah. So when he died at the age of 50 years, when he walked up 7 stairs and got a heart attack, died, he knew that he would be famous, and he knew that he would make a lot of money. Maybe not that he would sell 80 million books after his death, but he knew that he would be famous. So that's a destiny. But before that, his mission in life was actually to fight intolerance and mainly right-wing extremism. So he spent his whole adult life doing that. That was his most important mission.
That is incredible. There's so much about his story that's incredible. What was it? Well, first off, the right-wing extremism that he had dedicated his life to. Was this something that was at the forefront of the culture? He was Swedish, right?
Yeah, he was Swedish, and yeah, that's quite important. He was actually born in the far north of Sweden, above the polar circle, and he spent his childhood there under extremely poor conditions. And his grandfather had been in a concentration camp during the war, a German concentration camp. So he was, as a communist, the grandfather was a communist, actually. So Stieg, as a child, started to he took over that role of fighting right-wing extremists very early on in his life. So that's how he started that mission or quest. Yeah.
Wow. Is this something that is prominent in Sweden now?
Well. At the time, it wasn't so prominent, but we have had, I think, as any European country, we had people that were flirting with or even calling themselves Nazis during the Second World War, and these immediately after the war, of course, they suddenly changed and they whitewashed themselves and continued to be part of society, and Stieg's grandfather identified such people, and Stieg Larsson continued to do that, and he actually. In the 70s and 80s, especially in the 80s, he started to warn against these movements, the coming movements of the new right-wingers that we see now today and actually all over the world, the alt-right movements. He was very early in warning against these movements.
Wow. So what was he doing to combat this rise of this extremism?
Well, if you have read the novels, you have the journalist Michael Blomqvist, who's running a magazine, and that's actually an alter ego for Stieg Larsson. That's what he was doing. He was running a magazine against right-wing extremism, and he was also mapping and almost as a detective, trying to identify these networks of right-wingers in the Swedish society that went from the pure, let's say, Nazis through some right-wing extremists to the much more accepted people even in parliament that have connections to all these other right-wingers. And Stieg Larsson was mapping this and identified these different networks.
Wow. His story of getting his novels published is an amazing story in and of itself. And because his protagonist in the novels was an alter ego for himself, did he use the novel writing process to kind of help himself understand the world he was living in and the things he was up against?
Definitely, that was exactly what he was doing. I even think that it was closure for him, because very often if you do these things, research these networks, and you get far, but you never get to an end. And in the novel, he could do that. He could actually write to the end. So even if you read the novels, you can for instance. Notice that he mentions the assassination of our Prime Minister, Olof Palme, in all of the novels. He even writes reviews of books, especially in the third novel. So you can see the parallel world that he was living in, his real world, also inside the novels.
Wow, that's incredible, to where art imitates life and then life imitates art.
Yeah.
What was he working on other than his novels during this time?
Well, the last 4 years he was writing the novels, but before that his main mission was to identify and map these right-wing networks, and he was working at the largest news agency in Sweden called TT as an illustrator, in a very close parallel to Zodiac. Actually, if you've seen the movie Zodiac, where this illustrator starts investigating a murder. And that's what's happened to Stieg also, because on the 28th of February in 1986, our Prime Minister was shot down on the streets of Stockholm. in a street in Stockholm. And the next morning, Stieg Larsson came to his work, and he was immediately assigned to make a map of how different witnesses saw the murderer escape. So from day one, he was into the assassination, investigating it.
And this became a bit of an obsession for him. Was he just not satisfied with the way the investigation was going? Like, what was it, do you think, that just really, captivated him about this story?
I think if you ask any Swedish person about the investigation, nobody is happy with it. It's been 33 years, and it's still an unsolved murder. And there have been so many twists and turns in this investigation. And the murder is still on the loose. So he was definitely not satisfied with it. But it's also an extremely captivating story. If you start reading it, you should know that it's very easy to get obsessed. And if you spend too much time on it, you actually may turn crazy.
It's been 10 years now since we lost Stieg, and he passed away. How did you become involved in this story?
Yeah, and that's another. It's almost like from a novel of Stieg. I think it's a lot of coincidences. I was going to write another book, a completely different book, about places where double murders have appeared with a long time span in between. And I found a few places mainly in Sweden where we have had a murder maybe 50 years ago, and then at the same place another murder takes place 50 years later, and I came quite far on that story. And in one of the places, we have the von Sydow murders, where a young boy and his young wife also, where they killed the father in the house and two servants, very brutally. And these are very famous murders in Sweden. There have been books and theater plays and movies about this. And then 4 decades later, a person moved into that place, a right-winger called Dr. Ennerstrom, and he started to run a campaign against our Prime Minister, Olof Palme. And 23 years later, he had gone crazy, this guy Ennerstrom, and he was going to be evicted, and he shot a policewoman with 2 shots. So it was in the same apartment where these murders had occurred 5 decades or 4 decades earlier. So when I started doing research into this pretty fascinating story, I realized that Dr. Ennerstrom had been a real suspect in the assassination of our Prime Minister. And that's where it started.
The assassination itself was brutal and meant to send a message, wasn't it? The way that the Prime Minister was assassinated and the way that his wife was attacked. This was meant to do maximum damage from the get-go.
Oh yeah. If you would compare it to anything in U.S. history, it would be the JFK murder. It's definitely the European JFK, and either you accept that it's sold or not, the JFK, but it's still very much debated in the U.S. I know, and this is the same. It just goes on and on. But one thing you can know for sure is that it was a very strong message when he was shot down with 1 shot on the street.
And his wife was grazed by a bullet, but not really injured. But this was obviously an act of terrorism, if you want to look at it that way, that meant to shock and to leave everyone unsettled.
Yes, it was definitely an act of terrorism. But the crazy thing is that 2.5 years or close to 3 years after the murder, there was this new head of investigation, and he said, no, this is not an act of terrorism or a conspiracy. It's a lunatic. It's a madman's work, and that's the theory that he ran for that became the truth for almost 3 decades.
What is the danger of labeling acts like this as just the doings of a madman? Why is that so dangerous to just write it off as this was mental illness?
Well, I think any policeman's duty is to keep an open mind. You can't decide beforehand what you do. And we had the unfortunate luck or unluck of having actually two heads of investigation. They called Hans, by coincidence, both of them, and one of them decided that it was the Kurds, the PKK, the Liberation Organization of the Kurds, who did this. That was the first year on the investigation. And from the third year on, we had the second one saying that it was a madman's work. Unfortunately, in the second year of investigation, they were actually really close to solving the murder. And that's also the time when Stieg Larsson was handing in several documents and tips to the police how it happened. And they were working on it, and they came really close.
So his work that he was doing with this magazine got him involved initially. When did this become a passion of Stieg's, that he was digging deeper than just the initial assignment that he was given?
Well, at the time of the assassination, he was actually just an employee of the news agency, and making these maps and different illustrations that he was asked to do. But his real passion was to become a crime reporter. That was what he wanted to do. He never got there. So in his free time, he spent most of his free time actually investigating the right-wingers, and then after the murder, the actual murder, the assassination. So he was acting as something between a detective and a crime reporter. As I said, he got caught by this immediately after the murder, and then it went on. He was still collecting material on the murder when he died 18 years later.
Did other people know that he was continuing the investigation on his own?
Well, a close circle around him knew very well. Eva Gabrielsson, his live-in partner, that I know very well, and that has told me quite a lot about Stieg and how he was working and his life. She was helping him a lot, also actually with the novels. Not writing them, but sort of supporting him, reading it and commenting on it, and as well with the actual research into the assassination. So she was really his closest person, and then he had a handful of really close friends that knew about this.
Do you know what his plans were for this? All of this material that he was collecting. Did he plan to publish this at some point, or do you know what his ultimate motivations were?
Well, Stieg Larsson, he was planning to write 10 novels, and each of them in a slightly different style. And you can see that in the three first ones, that they're actually changing a little bit. And as I said, he mentions in each of them the Palme murder, and in the third one it actually becomes quite an important part where he describes what he calls a section in the secret police of Sweden. And what I think, and what Eva has told me also, is that he would write one of the books about the Palme murder, if it would be number 4 or number 5 or number 6, but one of them would have been about the actual assassination.
What's really interesting is, fiction might actually be the perfect place to change the people's minds and attitudes about a situation like this, where the official story may say one thing, but when you couch that in story, and you really build an engaging story around it, you can actually change the way people think and perceive something like that.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that was very much the plan of Stieg. If you read it, he read his novels. It's got all these messages in the text, and that's something that I don't really think there are in the number 4, 5, and 6. But there in the 3 novels that Stieg wrote, he's got this second story that is really, really important. And another way to know actually that he would write about the assassination is the letter that he wrote to his close friend Jerry Gable only 20 days after the murder, where it's a 7-page letter describing the assassination and witnesses and everything. But he also says, hey, maybe I should write a book about this. So he already had the plan 3 weeks after the murder.
Right. So you, Jan, are an investigative journalist and writer, and you've written about other high-profile political shenanigans in the past. How did you cross paths with Stieg and his work?
Well, before I've written about corruption in connection with our jet fighters, the Swedish jet fighters that we sold to different countries. And this time, as I said, I was going to write about places. It was supposed to be a novel based on reality. But in the research that I was doing on this Dr. Annerström, I came up. I was going through different archives, and in one of the archives, I found a non-signed paper without a date. And I asked the lady who had the archive, who wrote this, and she said Stieg Larsson. And I was like completely flabbergasted. I went, what has he got to do with a document that's obviously aimed for the police and about the Palme assassination? And she said, well, he did a lot. He was fascinated, obsessed with this story. So there may be more somewhere. And I thought that this would be good in my book also. So I started looking for more papers. And some 6 months later, it took quite a lot of work. I was standing in front of a door where they said that there may be some more papers, and I was thinking maybe there will be a small pile or a box or something. And this iron sheet door rolled up, and behind that was 20 large cardboard boxes full of documents from Larsson.
What was your reaction when you realized just how much information there was?
Well, I think I realized already then that this is maybe life-changing, and it did change my life for a few years to come. So I started digging into the paper, and actually they didn't allow me at that point to take the papers away from there. So I was sitting in this iron sheet building on the outskirts of Stockholm, the snowstorm outside, and I was sitting there for a full day just reading the papers, and I forgot time. It was pretty amazing.
So at what point did you decide to take this on, and did you realize that there was a book in this, that this work that Stieg had done needed to be collected and have a narrative built around it?
Well, I was writing a different book, a novel about the places. I've already written 100 pages at that point, and I decided that that's something I have to put to the side. I need to pick up the leads that Stieg had and meet the people that he was saying were involved in the killing. So I started traveling around Sweden, but also to different countries, to London, to the US, to Cyprus, and also to South Africa. And I met a lot of these people that Stieg pointed out for being involved.
Did it surprise you that this story was bigger than maybe you first anticipated when you started realizing that this is really an international story, and that maybe the tentacles of these underhanded people maybe go deeper than people want to think about?
Oh yeah, it definitely surprised me. It actually at that point I was a good Swede in the sense that I believe that what our government tells us and what our authorities tell us, that's the truth. So I believe that what they were saying, that unfortunately they didn't solve the murder. There wasn't enough evidence, but the guilty person was this drug abuser called Christer Pettersson, and everybody thought so for 3 decades. And then I found these papers, and it suddenly pointed to a large international conspiracy that Stieg Larsson was looking at. And I said, well, that's impossible, but let's have a look anyway. And gradually I realized that I think Stieg was right. I'm convinced Stieg was right, actually. And then we got a new prosecutor, a DA in Sweden called Christer Peterson. Christer Peterson, the DA, says now officially that it was definitely not Christer Pedersen, the drug abuser, who killed Olof Palme. So now the official statement from the government is suddenly changed. So the murder is unsolved, and they're looking at the South African lead, the middleman in Cyprus, and the right-wingers in Sweden. Exactly what Stieg described more than 3 decades ago.
Wow. You know, when reading this book, and I've read Stieg's other books, it doesn't take long when you really start getting immersed in the story, and you just pull us in almost immediately. You almost forget that you're not reading a Stieg Larsson book. And it reads like a novel. Is your natural writing style similar to Stieg's, or was it just this case that he had built that made it easy for you to kind of sink into his style?
I think my natural style is the novel, the narrative. So this is a narrative nonfiction. Everything should be true, and I would compare it no other, maybe not the quality, but I would compare it a little bit to In Cold Blood by Truman Capote.
Yes.
Yeah. That's at least a role model that I used. If it reminds people of the readers of Stieg Larsson, I'm happy also. I think the characters actually are very much like Stieg Larsson. I realized that during the time that I was writing it, that it felt almost like a Stieg Larsson novel. This lady, for instance, sitting in a mansion in the countryside, reminds very much of the old Nazi sitting in the mansion in the first novel. So it's I also see the parallels now.
Yeah, well, it's really strange because is this a testament to Stieg Larsson's novel writing in that he was trying to tell us a story of reality all along, and then when you present the reality, it feels so much like that. It's a really bizarre story when you start pulling the layers back. But I had not made the connection to In Cold Blood, but when you said that, absolutely, it feels very much like Truman Capote, and that's that way of presenting the story. Are there any things that you look for to help that narrative nonfiction, to establish that narrative through the story? Like, how do you begin? How do you decide where the beginning and where that story carries us through? How do you start mapping that out?
Well, in this case, and I probably would do it with any book that I would write. I went away for a month. I went to India, to Goa, and I sat there in a hut alone, and I started designing the structure of the book. Very much, if you know the hero's journey. The structure, yeah. So that I used this model. Not too much, not following it too closely, but trying to find the turning points and the different beats in the story already in the structure. And this is a complicated story to tell. So I think it's important to be able to keep the focus of the reader. You need to tell them, give them bit by bit the story, and I tried to do that, and I hope I managed. But it takes a lot of planning in the beginning to make up the structure of the book. With this story coming out and all of the work that Stieg had done and that you continued to do by compiling all of this, are you seeing any movement on this cold case that's 30 years old? Yeah. I'm speaking to the police quite frequently, every 4 to 6 weeks, and I met them 2 or 3 weeks ago. We actually had CBS over here from the US, and they're broadcasting something on this Saturday, and they were over here, and we met with the police together, and the head of the investigation is confirming that they're looking at the South African lead. They're trying to meet with the middleman in Cyprus, which you can read more about in the book, a Swedish guy working for the South Africans, and the Swedish right-wingers, including the person that I come to at the end of the book.
Did you feel a certain connection to Stieg throughout this process? Some people might feel like, that you're working with the ghost of this very important and popular writer. Did you feel a certain connection with him in working on this?
Not in the beginning, and much more when I was writing. When I was doing the research, it was more like I was doing it. I was in my own mystery. But when I was writing the book and I was sitting in small cafes in Stockholm, which Stieg did also all the time, he was writing in cafes, or he was meeting people in the cafes. And when I sat there and I was writing mainly in a very traditional cafe, very close to where I'm sitting now, actually, then I started to feel, well, this is... I'm writing about Stieg in cafes, and I'm sitting in a cafe, and so then it's hard to not see the likeness. Yeah,
it becomes very meta at some point, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You talked about going to India for a month to get away and to find that narrative thread. Is that something that you do often? Maybe not India, but kind of getting away, removing distractions. Is that part of your creative process naturally?
Yeah, it's getting away to keep the focus, to get the focus. That's definitely part of it. But it's also it is a fantastic privilege you have as a writer, that you can actually go to different places and write. And I think that's one of the best things about it. Actually, you can explore the world at the same time as you're actually working hard.
Were you ever worried in publishing this book and writing it that the truth might not sit well with certain people?
Well, yeah, there are different people. The people involved, they have reacted, some of them, and quite hard to indirectly and directly to me. That's one part. Then if there are a lot of people that immediately say that when there's a conspiracy involved, and then they don't believe in it. And that's definitely a reaction I've had. So that's another way to dislike the story. And I'm trying to be open, and I think that conspiracies, they do exist, and it's not only the ones that we know about. And then you have to be very careful so you don't go into a dark hole and become a conspiracy theorist yourself. So the reactions have been mixed, but I must say it's been published now in 17 languages, and another 10 languages to come, English next week. So the reception and the reviews have been, to the most part, very, very positive. So I'm even surprised, but I'm also very happy about it.
Well, it's very difficult to not become a conspiracy theorist when you're knee deep in an actual conspiracy, or what appears to be one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I admit.
Yeah, it will change your view on the world. You just can't help it.
Yeah. No, I'm actually starting to look at the next book, which are events connected to this. You remember, it's the late 80s. It's the end of the Cold War, and you have Reagan, and you have William Casey at the CIA, and you have Margaret Thatcher, and you have the apartheid regime and everything, and all the Iran-Contra and everything going on at this time. So it's easy to see these conspiracies and yeah.
Well, I'm very excited to see what you come up with next, Jan. The new book is called The Man Who Played with Fire, Stieg Larsson's Lost Files and the Hunt for an Assassin. This book is amazing, Jan. I'm proud to have it on my bookshelf, and we are going to send every one of our listeners to pick up a copy of it. If people are interested in finding out more about what you do, is there a place online that they could find you and read more about you?
Yeah, I've just launched my webpage, and that's www.stocklassa.com, and Stocklassa is STOCKLASSA.com. So that's a good way. And then I got Stocklassa on my writer's Facebook page also.
Excellent. We're going to send everyone to see you. There'll be links to everything in the show notes. Jan, this was so much fun talking. Thank you for this excellent book, and thank you for taking time to come on the show with us.
Thank you very much, Hank. It was great to be here. I'm really happy. Thanks a lot.
Thank you to Jan Stocklassa for joining me today. Now stay tuned for a special audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves, the Jason Crane series.
The ancient building wore the severe cassock colors of a Puritan minister, a uniform monochrome of slate-gray shingles and soot-gray clapboards, its shadowed upper windows cross-hatched like the facets of a spider's eye. The second story protruded beyond the first and bore the house's only ornament, 2 gray teardrops of wood, weeping from each corner of the building's stiff upper lip. The place would have looked sinister and foreboding in its shadowed alley if not for the die-cut silhouette of a dancing sheep, jaunty above the door, and the 2 front bay windows that blazed with colorful, welcoming light. The windows were hung with orbs of colored glass on staggered lengths of ribbon. Each orb glowed with autumnal reds and delicate greens, burgundy tints and pumpkin hues, dappled raspberry and clover lime, streaked with light and weightless as bubbles over a cauldron. The shelves below offered crystal skulls and silver daggers and horny devils, Celtic chalices and woven dream catchers in dreamcoat hues. A primitive broom leaned in a corner, ready for flight, and a rhapsodic nude in bronze clutched her goat-legged lover beneath a jackal bust of Anubis. The interior of the shop was even witchier. Above a crude and sooty fireplace, a stack of brick barely holding the shape of a chimney pushed through the barn-high roof, threading ancient beams that crisscrossed overhead. Brooms and kettles and Christmas lights dangled from these, alongside Halloween costumes and Chinese umbrellas, pointy hats and bundles of herbs. Jason wandered deeper into the shop. His fingers trailed across strange bronze statuary and Aztec masks of turquoise and lapis lazuli. He rolled his eyes at the luck candles and money charms, but goggled indecently at a nude and anatomically correct silver nymph with long golden hair that reminded him of Kate. "See anything you like?" Jason jumped, turned, and jumped again. The woman standing before him was the living embodiment of every hippy-dippy counterculture type he'd ever seen. Her hair was green, her face pale and round, her doughy body wrapped in some elaborately woven ethnic garb. Her eyebrows were black and pierced in little rows, and her eyes were heavily circled with midnight blue, as if she'd been sucker-punched by an oil slick. She tapped the glass over the nymph. "Admiring the goddess, I see." She'd practically caught him with porn. "You want to hold her? She won't break. Here." The woman flipped open a glass door and handed Jason the naked figure. "See how heavy she is? You could bang her against the wall all day and barely make a dent." She waggled her eyebrows, obviously enjoying his discomfort. He checked the price tag. $700? "The goddess is a symbol of love and fertility. Don't be ashamed of desiring her." The woman's long green fingernails plucked a long black cigarette from a long red case, and she lit it. "I sense," she blew smoke and studied its whorls, "dissatisfaction in love? Yes? I have just the thing." She pulled Jason into a side room where the smell of her clove smoke gave way to the skunky aromas of potpourri sachets, tea leaves, and hanging clutches of twiggy flowers. She searched, found a little bundle, and pressed it into his hand. "This will make you irresistible. Rub it on your nethers twice a day, and love shall surely find you." Jason made a face. The bundle smelled like cow manure. He didn't even want that on his hands.